Hello, we are back here for another edition of the Pay Practitioners panel, which we do every other Friday at this time. Today, this is a very special day because we've got a special guest, probably one of the most famous recruiters on all of LinkedIn. We are joined by the fabulous Bonnie Dilber. Today, we're especially excited to have her join because today's topic is how does compensation strengthen the relationship between recruiting. Compensation and recruiting oftentimes work hand in hand together, but understanding what are the different requirements or what are the different needs for each different part of the business is a really important part of the discussion. So we'll tackle that today. And we'll go first through a round of introductions. And myself, I'm Justin Hampton. I am the founder of CompTool, a market pricing and benchmarking solution. I've been a compensation practitioner for about 15 years before I started the CompTool, and we're happy to be here. So next we'll go in clockwise order. So how about yourself, Bonnie? Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Bonnie. I currently manage the business recruiting team at a SaaS company called Zapier. Prior to that, I spent many years in talent acquisition as well as like learning development, program management, all of that in education and nonprofits. And so lots of experience working with compensation teams, both on the recruiting side and as a hiring manager as well. And so excited for this conversation.
Great.
Learning development, program management, all of that in education.
And how about Jaime?
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Jaime Morfin. I'm speaking to you from Mexico City. I'm running sueldos.com, which is a compensation consultancy company with presence in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Great to be here again.
Great. Thanks, Jaime. Nancy.
Sure. Hi, I'm Nancy Romanishin. I work for Syndio, a workplace equity analytics platform. I'm the Senior Director, Total Rewards Strategy and Solutions, and have been in the compensation space a really long time, about 30 years. So both, at Syndio, in consulting, and in industry. So excited to be talking with everybody today.
Great. Sherry.
Hi, everyone. I'm coming from the happiest place on earth, Disney World today. So there you go. I'm a principal consultant with Morgan HR, and I've got about 30 years of experience in being a practitioner, and now I'm able to kind of help others along the way, being a consultant in more of the broad-based compensation scenes. So I'm happy to be here and talk about talent. I've worked with a lot of talent professionals.
Thanks, Sherry. Hi, I'm Jennifer Hasterick. I'm a senior principal at Korn Ferry, primarily focused on broad-based compensation as well, and also pay equity work. And at Korn Ferry, as you know, we also do a lot of recruiting, so I'll cross paths with my colleagues in that space as well. So looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise. And Greg.
O'Shea. I'm with United Health Group. I lead a team that supports our Optum Health business. So all of our care delivery organizations that would, be in healthcare type of roles.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thanks again, everybody. And let's get started with the discussion. So the first thing I'm going to throw out is really a question in terms of when it comes to pay, who has the final say? Who should be part of that conversation? Who really should be leading that discussion when we talk about bringing on different talent? Is it the recruiting team? Is it the compensation team? Or is it the line manager? I'd love to kind of hear different experiences or different things we've seen go well or not go so well. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and tackle that question first, but that's one of my favorite questions is who should hold the keys?
I would say it's a shared responsibility. I think having freedom within the is important, but having the guardrails, from the compensation team and the HR team, but then also adapting to the situation. That's what I've seen, and I've never worked in house, but I know that's what we see with clients, and advise, for clients to make sure that there's that flexibility to adapt, but still staying within the system and framework.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no question about it is a shared responsibility. What do we think the role of the compensation team primarily is? Is it to approve any offer that goes out above midpoint? Is it to approve any offer that should go out at all? Or is it to really set the ranges and take a step back? I'm curious, Bonnie, what have you seen in terms of working with different HR or compensation teams that has been a more effective approach?
Yeah, I've operated in a space where compensation really was kind of the final, like they would set the compensation and give it to you, and that's what you offered, and that was that. So I've actually worked in that environment, which I obviously did not prefer, being on the talent acquisition side. But I agree that it's kind of a shared responsibility. But from my perspective, compensation should kind of set the guardrails, as you said, and give freedom and flexibility within a portion of the range. And then, like you said, kind of be able to step in and ultimately approve anytime offers are getting into a range where you could be looking at a lack of internal equity, or something that just kind of goes up against like the company's policies. But I think if you have the right sort of policies, the right training, people understand why and how the ranges are set and how you place someone within the range, then I think you can trust your talent acquisition team to go with that and make 95% of the offers, and for them to know when something may be like for me, I won't approve an offer that my team wants to make that I know is going to violate our compensation like strategy and philosophy, because I understand it really well. And so I think if your team is well trained and on board, like invested, then they'll know when to kind of bring you in for guidance, and it can really be a partnership in making those final decisions.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic point that, creating those guardrails can be helpful. One of the things that I've seen in my own personal experience was I worked for a company where any offer that was over the midpoint had to be approved. And really what it did was it created a really, I don't know if cantankerous is the right word, but just a contentious relationship between the hiring manager and compensation, as well as the recruiting team. Because there were oftentimes just things at odds where, if the roles were set, if the ranges were set, then why were we having to go and ask for approval to offer somebody, an extra $200 just because it's over the minimum, but aligned with kind of the rest of the team within that group.
Yeah, I think, Justin, that's a really interesting point, and it's such a partnership. I think you have to build it though, right? There can be that contentious relationship, but I had a couple situations with a recruiting team where my recommendation, they came to me and they said, here's what we have, and the manager wasn't happy, and all this kerfuffle was going on, and I said, well, let me take a look at it. So I looked at it and I actually gave them more. I said, really, I think the pay is here. I had a couple of those, my pay is higher, from the comp person, and all of a sudden we were buddies, right? So if they didn't, and that was a fluke, I didn't make it that way, it just happened. And then I thought, wow, there's really something to that. So it's a learning experience and understanding who your recruiting team is, and they come in with past experiences dealing with compensation people, so everyone kind of has to build their own relationship with them to elevate their roles, honoring what each other's trying to accomplish.
I think that's so spot on, Sherry. I think what we're seeing a lot of our customers do is build that relationship by sharing more information. So one of the things we operationalize is using pay equity, using the pay equity analysis to really guide offers and educate and partner with talent acquisition to just make it easier for everybody to kind of be reading, the same information, understanding when I'm going to a candidate, how do I explain why we pay what we pay? And it's been really successful. We have a case study actually where one of our customers, Elevance Health, was able to not only reduce their pay equity remediation costs by significantly, like 25%, but even they decreased time to fill positions by 6%, and they increased the acceptance rate by 6%. And it was, I think, to your point, Sherry, right? It's making it a win-win situation with talent acquisition to say, hey, here's my thinking. Let me give you a little bit more. I'm not just trying to be like the compensation police. This is right. This is our comp philosophy. This is how it's playing out. And let's work together to try to determine what's going to be the right process here. But also, I feel like talent, and Bonnie, you can speak to this. I mean, there's so much pressure on talent acquisition right now, especially with pay transparency. I'd love to actually understand from you more about what has that experience been like in these past couple of years. I'm sorry, Justin, if I'm like jumping ahead of your questions here, but I'm so excited to be talking to Bonnie today. I think I just would love to know what that experience has been like, and like what have those pressures been like? Because there's just been, you guys are like on the front lines of all of that.
Yeah, it's funny. My opinion on this differs from a lot of recruiters that I know. And this might impart, I manage our team, so I'm not talking to candidates as regularly, though I do occasionally like still talk with candidates. So anyway, I share that caveat to say, I love the transparency of the full range. I love helping people understand why a large range is being put in front of them, but you're not actually eligible for that top portion. And here's why. I feel like one of the biggest disservices that we've done to like the entire workforce globally is not training people from their very first job, how and why their compensation is set, how it is, how compensation works. Like, people should understand that from a very young age so that they can kind of think about and plan their career accordingly and have informed conversations instead of seeing a range and saying, I'm targeting the top of the range. I've also, when I started at Zapier, like many companies, the norm was to ask what's your target salary? I've asked that we like not ask that. We lead with, here is the range. Here's where we're likely to bring you in. How does that align with your expectations? Because people should never feel like the number that they say has any relevance in the compensation they receive. And it shouldn't. If what a candidate wants is driving what you offer them, you have a very inequitable system, at least in my opinion. I also don't necessarily feel like teams should negotiate much for that same reason, because if you have a strong approach to setting compensation that is consistent across everyone, then you shouldn't be making an offer and someone shouldn't be able to negotiate it up, because then the person willing to negotiate is going to be getting a lot more money than those who might be afraid to negotiate. And it's generally going to work against women and BIPOC. Like those sorts of things, I think people need to have those conversations in the workplace early so that they can kind of think about that. And what does it mean if this company offered me 70,000 and then landed at 90? What does that mean about the initial offer that company was willing, what that company was willing to compensate me for versus what they really think I'm worth? Like, those sorts of things should really make people, should give people pause instead of making them feel like they won. So sorry, I get really fired up about this topic. So anyway, in my opinion, we need to share that full range. We need the transparency, and then we need to be able to do the hard work of educating the workforce, even though I think sometimes it leads to people. There was a post last week that I saw where someone said, they felt like there was a bait and switch because they went into an interview and it turned out the top of the range wasn't actually going to be offered, and they felt misled. And I was like, you weren't really misled. Let me give some context for what likely happened with that company. But anyway, I think we need to do that hard work versus avoiding it and having just an uneducated workforce.
Yeah, there was an article. Oh, sorry, Jaime, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
There was an article last year in Bloomberg that I was interviewed for, and it was when the pay transparency was coming out. And I didn't know what the title of the article would be when it came out. But when the article did come out, I was quite surprised and had kind of like, I need to be more careful with the articles I allow myself to be quoted in. Because the article was called, "Companies Are Posting False Ranges to Depress Wages." And essentially what it meant was, a company, they're just posting what they reasonably expect to hire, which isn't the full range. And I think we as compensation and recruit and TA, we know that those top of the ranges are typically reserved for, really senior or really unique cases. It's not impossible, but it's not a guarantee. And I think when we look at the spirit of the laws and the way they're written, it's what do you reasonably expect to pay? Well, I don't reasonably expect to pay at the top of the range. It could happen though. And I wonder too, Bonnie, in terms of when you've looked at posting ranges, when you've had those candidates come in, are they typically demanding the top of the range, or have you found that to be a difficult conversation just to really navigate around that? And what has been some of the better tools in your toolbox to help candidates have a real understanding so they don't feel like it's a bait and switch when they come in without depressing wages?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that helps is, and we very quickly, alongside posting the ranges on our job postings, added a line that some companies will have where we say we typically see people coming in the bottom of half of the range, kind of the top, half, or it might say top third, something like that, is really reserved for people who have been here for a while and shown impact. So that's what's on our job posting. So I think people kind of come in, if they read that far, they come in with that understanding, and then our recruiters kind of walk through that. And again, I have not had necessarily a lot of those conversations since I don't personally recruit for most of our roles, but I have watched videos of my team having that conversation as part of their training. We use a tool that records most of our interviews, and with candidate permission. And so generally I find that most people understand it once it's sort of explained, and we talk about sort of what our model is. We have we have things we can show them so it can become pretty clear to them. This is standard practice, and this is like what you can expect for growth. And here's the criteria that will be used in determining kind of where you would land. So I think that's generally helped. And, we haven't necessarily seen people coming in and saying, oh no, I was, only interested if you'll pay me the top of the range or that sort of thing. But I do think that we set aside more time in these conversations to talk about that than we did a year ago.
Well, one of the things that I'm seeing frequently is probably not in the the right communication of what is the compensation policy of the company itself, but mostly on how to handle exceptions. Why should be considering exactly that right person who is, I don't know, 15-20% above of the ranges that we define? Who should they make the decision, and under which circumstances that position that hiring should be approved? I don't know, guys, if you haven't had exactly the same situation. In the case that I see mostly is business, the business side of the people is defining that recruitment. It is the one that really makes the right decision, makes the call. It is the person that I need, and I need to bring in. It doesn't matter how much it costs. Have you heard that? Have you seen those exceptions eventually?
I mean, what's interesting is I think that's where the education can be really powerful. So that same case study, Adam Swanland there was really leading the charge on sort of implementing this new process of helping people feel these discussions around, no, I have to pay above this. And honestly, by just showing a visualization of, all right, here's the range, this is why, and hiring manager, understand that if you hire above that, you're going to put our pay equity at jeopardy. It's going to put, other things out of whack. It worked. It became just a really compelling sort of discussion. And the manager backed down and said, no, I get it now. So, I mean, I feel like there's this opportunity to contextualize the information that we're providing much more. And I think, to everybody's point, and I think it's similar, right, Justin, to what we've been talking about the last two panels, which is just, it's got to be sort of this ongoing conversation, ongoing education. And I think, Jaime, it's also just reinforcing that message of what is our comp philosophy, but also I think iterating it too. I think like that's I'm interested to hear also from folks, has sort of this back and forth, are you seeing sort of evidence of, I know we have some folks in the chat talking about narrower ranges. I mean, I would imagine, right, one of the ways to not have to explain so much about a big range and why you're not at the top of it is just to not have a big range. So like that's something else too. I mean, I wonder if are we seeing sort of more of that where people are changing design as a result of having to have these conversations?
Yes and no, right? Because I think one of the problems that are coming about is that internal getting your house in order thing. So if you're going to narrow the range and you're going to post that narrow range, all the employees in the company are going to see that more narrow range. And if they're falling out or going above, then you're not doing a very good job internally of managing that pay conversation, right? So we do want to narrow, right? Make it more right size, but you have to have money to do that. And it's a big lift in a lot of places for a lot of companies. So yeah, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It didn't get here overnight. We can't fix it overnight. So
Sherry, something you said, getting your house in order. I think that's something that I literally had a conversation yesterday with a client of what is the message you're going to tell and how are you going to tell it? But first, let's make some of these decision rules. And we literally spent 2 hours getting all the decision rules laid out so that then we can communicate. And they have a commitment to being transparent in concept, not numbers, right? And so that everybody on the same page, can understand what's happening. There was a comment in the chat about, do you put comp philosophy or statement education within your JDs? We talked about annually having a review to everyone. So it's not just the managers pushing the information down, it's globally a town hall each year to say, this is how we do comp and this is, and this is why.
Yeah, but I just love the fact now that we have permission to really talk about pay equity and pay transparency, so that when a leader really wants to pay above the range compared to the people that are actually doing the work, you can bring it forward to them and say, okay, now by making that decision, you are raising the pay of all of your employees for this one individual who are comparable in that job. Was that your intent? Or how do we make this work, right? To really just sit back and again, use the data to tell the story of what we need to accomplish as an organization.
I love that.
I think the ongoing challenge, right, is all of us are compensation people and we live in this every day. And even with TA, you're in it every day. So you think about it all the time. And our managers might hire one person a year or not. They may not have hired anybody for a year or so. And so, Bonnie, I'm sure every time you and your recruiters are doing this, it's like a re-education process with whoever the manager is. So maybe the question is like, how have you seen an effective sort of, I'll call it an intake meeting with hiring managers and maybe comps involved? Maybe they're talking about what are your expectations for what you want to pay for this position, and it's almost like training, like a me training whenever you have that meeting. Have you seen anything that works really well or something that doesn't work so well? Obviously not, it doesn't work well, but curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think y'all should have a member of our comp team on this panel, because I think that they do a lot of things really, really well. And one of them is that every single employee in our company has access to the full ranges. Like they can look up for their job, for any job. It's transparent, and they've built a tool that both allows recruiting to do that and for any other employee to do that. And there is more training than I've ever had around, like, people understand what a comp ratio is here. Just, pretty much any hiring manager, certainly. They're getting, to be a part of that conversation when we're doing annual raises, and we're kind of using the same tools, the same systems and hiring as we are with the rest of someone's compensation journey. And so I think that there is a lot of education here, much more than I've seen anywhere else that I've worked. And I think that has a big impact, honestly, on making this conversation easier, where when my team sits down with a hiring manager, they're saying, okay, like, you know, there's not a conversation of like, what do you want to pay for the range? Because it's not about, or what do you want to pay for the role? Because it's not about the hiring manager's like personal budget. We pay within the range following our compensation philosophy for every single hire. And that is, you know, that's what drives what the compensation is going to be for the role, not what the hiring manager wants to pay. And so if we hire someone who is, you know, kind of earlier in their career, whose skill set has some room for growth, they're going to be paid lower in the range. If we're hiring someone who is extremely qualified for the role, has done the role before, we're likely to pay higher in the range, you know, because that's what those skills and experience warrant. We may talk with them, you know, sometimes they say, I want someone early career. I want someone growing. I want someone, you know, they're going to be in this role for a couple of years. So we're not looking for someone who's really experienced because we need them to stay at this level for a few years. Sometimes they'll say, we anticipate this role being up leveled within the next year or two. So we need to have someone who's going to grow with the role. So that conversation will happen, but it's not driven by, I want to pay this for the role.
I really like that, Bonnie. Like, that's great insight into sort of the broader, you know, that's literally what the comp philosophy is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to drive and help us manage, you know, people and jobs in a way that makes sense for the business. And it sounds like that's what you're essentially having a conversation about, you know, the not only the requirements of the role, but its development, what, you know, the expectations, sort of the surrounding employee experience, which is, I think, so important. And it sounds like it becomes a much better partnership, you know, between teams. I know I've seen in the chat, some folks have commented about sort of the siloed approach I think we've had in the past. And that's where I think we're at this place of we really just need to work together better. And that sounds like that's really part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would also say, like, let's flip this around too, because I think as people, and we've all probably had experiences with recruiters who, let's face it, in some cases it's going to make their job easier to pay more, right? To find candidates, or to you know, the higher the pay, it might be easier to find the candidate, right? So how do you push back on that and say, you know, I think one of comp's role is to question, right? And so I see Lorgan here in the chat that we need to ask TA what tensions they're experiencing. And I think comp also needs to say, like, well, okay, why are you trying to do more? Is it like you can't find anybody, or are we recruiting for the wrong role? Like we're trying to go too high on the experience and skills, higher than we need to for the role, and more for that, it's going to make our job easier.
Yeah, that right sizing the role is really important sometimes. I find a lot, if you can't find the talent, you'll take anyone, right? So then if you have a very experienced person come in with a lot of tenure who would probably fit really well in the team, but their pay is like 3 times what other people are being paid, there has to be that right sizing event.
And I wonder too, you know, there's the range, there's the internal equity components, there's the market information. But Bonnie, I'd be curious on your take. What information is really important for recruiters to have, and how broadly should that information be? So we're developing kind of a recruiting tool to help companies make internally equitable but also market competitive offers. And one of the things that from my previous experiences as a comp practitioner, all of our recruiters at essentially every company I'd worked for had visibility across the organization. But I found from a lot of our clients that, oh no, they don't, that information's, you know, this team is segregated to, they can only see this part of the business. This one can only see this part of the business, which in many cases is okay. But in many other cases, it does really put some blinders on and potentially kind of put some constraints around how effective a company can manage pay equity, for example. So I'm curious, what information and how broadly do you think is right, and how could you expand that to the talent acquisition team to give them more information? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I do ultimately think like we can request. I used to have access to, I think we used to have more access to people like compensation by department, and now we can request it from our compensation team versus just being able to like look up salaries. And I think that's probably better just from a like privacy. So we can certainly like request that information, and hiring managers of course have access to their team, so they'll kind of check for that. I do think that if you are clear on your philosophy and in alignment with it, then you shouldn't have internal equity issues if you are disciplined in terms of how you are evaluating candidates and have clear rubrics for doing that. Like I don't think it is automatically internal equity or an internal equity issue if you bring in someone higher than someone else in the same title. But that needs to be driven by the person's experience or whatever your philosophy kind of privileges. It needs to be driven by that versus that was what we had to pay to get that person. So for me, it's more about being really well trained on how the compensation is set and disciplined on that, and having like that training, and then having someone who can maybe like do the check. And that's where I do think it's helpful to not necessarily look at it as like we need comp approval when it's above the midpoint or something like that, but more of it's atypical that we bring in someone. So when we're doing that, let's get some other eyes on it from like a partnership, from a, like working together to make sure that we are being in alignment with our compensation philosophy. And that should be the thinking of it versus seeing it as like an approval of I need a rubber stamp yes when it's above this. It's more of like I want that because we want to make sure that we are being equitable. And so for me, it kind of goes back to like clear training around a philosophy and execution of that versus checking like where people stack up on a list.
And Nancy, I wonder too if you have anything to add to that, because I know that Syndio has a tool to help kind of manage with that. And I'm just curious, from your experience, what have you seen be the data elements that have really helped to shift some of the pay decisions that are made with new hires over time?
Yeah, I think it's Justin, it is building on, say, Bonnie, what you're talking about, but it's doing it in sort of a data format. And so having in front of you, what we find, Justin, is it's having that equitable range that's based on the internal pay equity analysis for those roles, and looking at the intersection of that and then whatever market guidance there is. So market data, your salary range, and just kind of having all of that line up together to really provide those guardrails. We find that's really the most effective, that visual of this is the range that is ideal. Because what we're doing is we're building it off of, when we're using internal pay equity analysis, you're building it off of your comp philosophy. This is how we pay people internally. These are the rules sort of the road, and having the salary range there, having the market data there. It's just a very compelling and powerful guidance, and it takes a lot of the guesswork. I guess that's what I'm kind of hearing here too, right? Bonnie, to your point earlier, it shouldn't be as much of a negotiation. There shouldn't be sort of this back and forth. We talk about comp as an art and a science, and I'm quite frankly, after 30 years of this, I'm really tired of the art part. I want it to be more scientific. I feel like it can be if we just, to your point too, are disciplined around it and say, hey, we're all grown-ups. We don't pay like this company over here or this company over here because we actually don't really compete with them. Do you want to understand what our market is? This is what we mean by market. I think, Justin, Gartner had research where they did or actually, no, I think it was Josh Bersin and company, pardon me. But it was basically research around, people don't want to be paid the most. They want to be paid fairly. They want to be paid competitively. They want to know that what you're giving them is something is reasonable. They don't need to, make the most of everybody. So I just think it sounds like what we're talking about is as much as we can kind of operationalize the philosophy, the processes we have in place, and be as transparent as possible around that, you can have a reasonable conversation. And it sounds like, Bonnie, that's a lot of the conversations that folks are having.
And I love Justin Sun's note saying that, we need to make sure we're setting candidate expectations because it was a long note, so it won't fully pop up. But essentially what he's saying is there are some companies like Meta, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google that do pay outside of the realm of what is typical for most companies. And if a candidate really has those expectations in their head when they go into an interview, that's going to create a challenge for some of those teams. So I love kind of, Nancy, to your point, how do you kind of set those expectations? And I think, Bonnie, too, you were mentioning, how do you have that education piece around in those job postings that includes what candidates could reasonably expect. But that does bring. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say one other conversation being in tech, and sometimes those are the salaries people see. And so we've had that conversation transparently too, of telling someone, hey, if that's the kind of comp you're looking for, then you're going to want to go to those companies because the overall, offering here is different. The long-term play at a private company is going to be different as well. Your equity can hold a very different kind of value when you're looking at a private company, and what is the potential there. So I think also continuing to educate the workforce on all total compensation. What is, everything related to the experience of working at this company. It's not just about that salary, but yes, if you are indexing on how do I maximize my base salary today, you should go to one of those other companies that's the right thing. There is a different play when you're looking at a smaller private company. There's a different play and a different value proposition at a nonprofit, and so on and so forth. And so I do think that candidates have to also be educated on that side of things.
But Bonnie, something you said early on, kind of going on to that, is about the career too, of educating what does a career look like. And if that's your aspiration of comp, it might not be at the level and role that you're at if you want to be at a certain level of company, right? So how do you get there and what does that look like? And I think that's what I've seen, with our clients of, it's talking about that career pathway. That's what the transparency has also come, but it's not just been about pay equity. It's also, where is your career going? And more of those conversations. And once someone's like, okay, I want to be there. So how are we going to get you there? And it's not probably in this role. It's going to be maybe a role or two above where you're at.
I think that's so important, Jennifer, especially with the EU directive coming up, where it's literally laying out opportunity transparency, career transparency, and some of the other states that are starting to come out with that. I think Illinois. I mean, you're just seeing this trend of, again, greater transparency, but making sure that you can really fully explain, with job architecture, sort of this, how do I progress, the fuller sort of idea of what is somebody's career trajectory.
And where do they want to be? And do they, you may have a higher salary, but is that your choice? Is that really what you want? Right? What is that's place? And I think that way people feel that they have a choice in their career and where they want to be. I think which is fantastic. I mean, I'm glad we can talk about it.
And Nancy, you also brought up that word fair again, which we talked about quite intensively 2 weeks ago. And that's that feeling, and that's hard for us we can't control that, how the employee or the candidate feels about it, right? But we can do our best to give them our story of what it means, and they can make that decision. And I think that really is what's revolutionizing the whole recruiting part. It's not behind the curtain anymore. They want to see behind it. And which again makes you think you got to get your house in order because they're going to come behind the curtain and see it. So let's, make sure that works.
Yeah, I have a slide that I use during presentations sometimes, and it kind of gets a chuckle, but I'll say, folks are, employees are compensation analysts now, and people kind of, yeah, they'll be like, well, like, it's not so funny, it's kind of real and true. So just when we think about how much information folks have. So I think just acknowledging, right, Shari, that employees are very much helping us design pay programs now. So it's, just kind of being ready for that and being upfront about, great, totally get it, the information you're bringing to the table and sort of what your idea is here, let me help. And I think, Bonnie, that's what you're speaking to. Let me help you understand what the organization, what this role is all about and how we're thinking about it, just to level set. And so that way we can align. And if this is a good fit, then yeah, let's proceed.
And I don't know if this we can stay on this, but one of the things I think is related to this question is when those companies and employees are looking at different kinds of data, or there's the data is not aligning to the candidate's expectations or the TA's experience. I have personally found great luck by evaluating each qualified employee to a limit, and kind of understanding, do they actually fit within our range, and where would we place them based on our philosophy. But there are other times where the data just doesn't align to what we're seeing and experiencing, whether it's a short-term burst of demand or it is a prolonged challenge because it's a hot job, like a prompt engineer, for example, today. So I wonder too, if Bonnie, have you found, or really in the panel as well, what kind of luck have you found, and what other resources have you found that can help kind of shape those conversations when the data is just misaligned to candidate expectations, TA's needs, and then the line manager's expectations as well?
So you mean like when we are basically unable to find someone that is willing to accept the range that we have that also kind of aligns with the okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think a couple of things. One is, again, our compensation team is just incredible partners. And so we track every time we lose a candidate due to comp, or someone says, that's just not going to work for me. We track what that person's experience is and, what their actual expectations were. And we share that with the compensation team. And if that is coming over and over again, then I trust, like, we haven't really run into this a ton, but I generally trust that they're going to work with us to adjust the ranges. I will say, when I was going through my own hiring process, this happened, that the offer I got was above the range that was quoted to me. And that was because partially timing. It was in November. They were doing their analysis and changing the ranges for the following year. And this was 2021. And so, lots of salaries were on the rise. So I kind of benefited from that. The range changed while I was in the middle of the process, and they were able to come in with an offer that was actually higher because of that. So anyway, but sometimes I think that talent acquisition actually sharing those data points, so that if the market is changing around us, then compensation teams, I think, have to be flexible and evolve alongside that. But sometimes it's also conversations with the hiring manager around, hey, this is like, are we actually looking for candidates that are beyond what this job posting, the level is? Like, if you're looking for a strategic leader, but you are hiring them at a manager level, a manager isn't a strategy. Like, they should generally be able to translate strategy into tactics, not develop brand new strategies in spaces that haven't existed. So is your titling, is what we're looking for off here. And so sometimes it also kind of gives us that data to go back to, like, the leveling of the role and all of that. And I think that just needs to be a partnership between the department, the hiring manager, compensation, and talent acquisition. But I think a lot of times we are getting the most current data from the market. And so that's, important to be kind of sharing back so that the company can be agile and evolve.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point.
I wanted to,
because in a way, somebody was saying about working in silos, and it does happen. And also in terms of what kind of data you're normally basing your decisions, the comp team normally will go to actual data, not just numbers. And we spend a lot of time either working with a compensation tool or like spreadsheets or any other things that we don't see the human part of what's going on outside. So I think, Bonnie, what you said is just great. Just having that insight, the human perspective from those who are outside just looking for a job and get in contact with the actual people looking for a position. It should be a way for us, the compensation guys, to have it a way of understanding that information, getting those insights, and having a broader perspective, not only numbers. I think it's essential for having the right mix there.
Yeah.
I worked
think,
with
and it's
sorry.
kind of
Right, you go. Sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No. Yeah, and I've seen it. We had Bob made a comment here about university programs, setting unrealistic expectations. There was another comment earlier, I can't remember who said it, about advanced degrees and all those kind of things. I think there's a lot of forces that give jobs unrealistic expectations about the comp because they're thinking about, obviously they're worried about what they need. But when we're hiring for the job, we're like, this is the job it does. And so I've seen instances where people will say, like, I've got a doc X. Why am I not getting paid for it? It's because an X has nothing to do with the job you're doing. Just because you got a doctorate doesn't mean you're going to get paid for that. And it's unfortunate for that person because they spent a lot of money getting that. But now they're doing a job that doesn't require it. And people don't understand that. They don't understand that we're paying for the job and we're paying for the best skills in the job. But if the job skills aren't needed, we're not going to pay for them. So there is a lot of other stuff in the world that's telling people do these things, go out and spend money to get an education, which you may not need that education. So it's a challenge there to like balance that outlook. And people should definitely get educated if they want to. But then you've got to go use the education. Otherwise, it's not going to give you a return on that investment. But I think that's something we run into a lot is helping people understand, here's the role, and we're going to pay for the role. And if you're really great at that role, we'll pay you more. But if you're really great at something totally, like, I'm sorry that somebody sold you on that, but that's not something we're gonna pay for.
And I think, yeah.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, one of my favorite things about pay equity analysis is when you find out that what you're actually paying for versus what you're not paying for. And so to your point, Greg, you find that out that we say this, but actually this is what we're doing. And then we can look critically and say, does that make sense? And it may. The reason why we're paying the way we're paying is because, we're not paying for these degrees because we're not actually differentiating pay. We don't really need that level of expertise, or maybe in this one area of the business we do, so those are the types of things I think that the more quickly people can really suss that out and be authentic about what they're saying, then it makes, I think, your job easier, Bonnie, from that perspective.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think along those lines of I think people understanding that the compensation range is generally about the job and not the person is one of the most important things. In this market, especially, I think a lot of people are hiring or applying for jobs that they're a bit overqualified for. And then often kind of coming in with, well, but I've done 20 years, I've managed this role before. Why am I not being paid at that level? And it's like, because we're not looking for that job right now. And so we can't pay for a job that you're not doing. And so I think that degree piece also goes to people's qualifications, where you're probably going to be brought in higher than someone who's kind of new into a role. But if you're taking a few steps back in your career, your compensation is going to align with that. And I think some of those things are really hard for job seekers, but if they can kind of understand that in general, I think it can help this be a lot less painful for everyone involved.
Yeah, and we're not doing them any favors by hiring someone with all these degrees in a lower job, because they're not going to be happy, okay? Because they won't get the job that they need. And, I think the other thing is we have to be really good at defining our job descriptions and stepping back and seeing where we really need to make sure we're putting the right degree on the right job, if we need a degree at all, right? And then the second point, let's call the job what it is. Not everybody can be a director of something, right? So I think that you really need to align those job titles to manage those expectations. And, I've talked to a number of clients where they'll make this a director of something. And I'm like, well, what are you looking for in that job? Well, I want, someone with 3 years of experience and, and I'm like, you're not going to get that with a director job. You're going to get a very high paid person. So that whole internal alignment to make sure that TA has the tools they need to succeed in what they're looking for is very important. And then we get into that conversation of who owns job descriptions. But that, again, is another panel. So we're going to focus on this one.
I just like James's statements right here. I thought that was worth highlighting, certainly.
A quick question, Bonnie. I'm kind of wondering as we're talking about experience and how much credit do you see organizations give for prior credit? And, because if you could have 20 years in a role, but let's say it's a mid-level role, that 20 years, how much boost do you see? I mean, you won't put them at the top of the range necessarily. And Greg, even in your space, because I'm sure you have a lot of that with clinicians and whatnot, what's the patterns you're seeing there?
One, I do think the company's compensation philosophy matters here because working in education, it is a very step-by-step. And so it really was almost lockstep. X number of years, Y salary. It didn't matter what your skill sets, your results, your achievement. It's just X years, Y salary. Government jobs, lots of those like that. Other places I've worked, it's not necessarily based on years. It's based on the demonstrated results and the skills you demonstrate in the interview process and that sort of thing. And the years of experience might be a component, but not the only one. One thing I've sometimes also seen is if someone has 20, 30 years of experience, but their skill set is showing up like someone isn't matching that can actually be, kind of a concern of if they're not demonstrating the skills you need, yet they have extensive experience at this exact kind of role and in this job family, then those years of experience shouldn't warrant a really high salary unless, again, your compensation philosophy is such that it's purely on experience. And maybe that should give you some pause around what kind of impact this person is going to have if you need something, very different or you're looking for a different skill set. I think there's all that stuff that needs to be considered, but it does kind of come down to does your compensation philosophy include years of experience as a factor? And if it does, then you should pay more for more years of experience. And if it doesn't, then the years of experience shouldn't be the thing that causes you to pay someone more if everything else tells you they should be brought in lower. And so I think that should ultimately kind of drive where you put them.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would say in a space where a lot of healthcare workers, whether you're like a nurse practitioner, physician assistant, RN, even physicians, right? They're probably in that for a long time, but you're looking for did they do other things? Are they training people, taking on leadership positions, even if it's not an official supervisory positions, leadership positions? That shows, progressing through the skills and stuff. I mean, you may not typically go out and say, I want a nurse practitioner with 20 experience, but you may find them, and they're gonna want higher pay because that's what they're at, right? I'm not going to be oh, I'm going to a new place, I'm going to step back. And even this isn't our environment, but some of our competition is very much, there's a lot of labor structures and things by experience, and they're now starting to they're recognizing that years of experience for people coming in, right? Start at the bottom when you come in. So we're seeing a little bit of that now, which again, just adds more pressure to making sure we keep up there. So, there's different things to look at other than just the years of experience, but you're going to see people stay in the same position for a long time. Their title's not going to change, but you look for other things to factor in how you might pay the premium for their experience.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
Well, great. So we are coming up on the top of the hour. That went fast. So, one of the things I'd love to do is just, with the last 3.5 minutes that we've got left is, just a quick, final thought from everybody. I'll go first, so I have the easiest time. But no, I think really, my easy final thought is just that the comp and the TA team, it's a collaborative process, and building that relationship requires being empathetic towards both sides. And we can go clockwise. So Bonnie and then Jaime.
I think mine is quite similar, that if your compensation and your talent acquisition teams are kind of truly operating in lockstep and there's a sense of partnership instead of it feeling like one, sets the rules and the other is simply executing, if they're true partners in the strategy and both have that shared outcome of bringing the best talent and rewarding that talent for working in the business, then I think that's what kind of sets you up for success.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a change of the way that the standard recruiting process was happening. Nowadays, with so much information available, market data, very good understanding how the levels of an organization work, it's very difficult to go and really talk about the negotiation process while recruiting the correct person. So I think it's challenging, and I see that the TA team in this regard is getting most of the pressure here. That would be my sense, and with this collaboration that we're talking about, might things get better through time, but we need to see.
My suggestion would just be, lean into the collaboration. I think, Jaime, like you said, lean into sharing information together, working together and collaborating, educating one another. And there are tools there, you can work together quickly, bring together that data and the data visualization. It's your friend as you come together around trying to get the best candidates and making that process just as easy as possible. Because to Jaime's point, everybody's playing with a lot more information. So own the story together.
Mm-hmm. You're on mute.
You're muted.
That's good, because my first few words were not very coherent. Okay, so now I'm back. I think what my takeaway is, the compensation philosophy is incredibly important. And there's so many companies that don't have that. And then when I think back on what we could do as compensation professionals is really reach out to those TAs, the people in talent, and go, here's what we have for tools for you. Here's our job structure, not our organization structure, but our job structure. How do our jobs align? Can you show this to someone who's maybe coming in as an entry-level person and see what their opportunity is? To really present those tools in a fashion that they can use as recruiting tools to bring people in. So comp philosophy and recruiting tools, that's what I have.
I'll make mine really quick. Continue to build the foundation. And I think part of it is that it's not just about talent acquisition, it's talent retention too, right? Continuing the conversation through the career and lifespan of any employee. I think that's what I'm seeing, that continual conversation on both sides.
Okay, so Laura Morgan had said something that's changing in the next with comp and TA. So I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say TA working with a comp resource that's AI to evaluate compensation. So saying, this is the job, this is what I'm looking at, how does this line up, is this the recommendation? And it's going to be some sort of AI program that gives them the recommendation or not. I don't know, maybe not, but I can see that coming. And maybe in a few, the TA entity is AI as well, talking to the comp AI. So AI entities talking to each other about the offers.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. I know we've all got meetings to run to. So we'll go ahead and close this out. But thanks again, everybody, for joining the Pay Practitioners panel. And many special thanks to Bonnie for spending an hour with us today. So thank you guys so much.